This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Go to the link in the description below so they know that I sent you. Hello everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and it is Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the video series where I rank cards from throughout Magic's history based on how they have performed at the competitive level. If you were with me on Monday when I tried to bring you this MTG Top 10 before being interrupted by ASHIOK Dream Render, who milled the whole list, this list won't come as much of a surprise to you. It focuses on cards that mill. For this video, the definition I used for milling is to put cards from the top of your opponent's library into exile or the graveyard. To be eligible for this video, a card has to be used primarily for milling your opponent for some type of advantage. I did not include cards that people use to mill themselves exclusively or primarily because I feel like self-mill is its own list. Before we get started, a quick reminder on how I score these videos. Pro Tour and Mythic Championship top 8s, as well as Legacy and Vintage Championship top 8s are worth 2 points, and Grand Prix top 8s are worth 1 point. Now, let's get started with number 10. At number 10, we have CODEX Shredder, the kind of card that was in a lot of people's bulk card piles until 2015, when the Lantern Control deck emerged in Modern at Grand Prix Oklahoma City. These decks get Ensnaring Bridge into play to lock down the board, and then use Lantern of Insight in conjunction with the Shredder, along with Goldcollar's Bell or Pyxis of Pandemonium, to completely control everything the opponent draws, making it so that they never draw anything meaningful, and eventually they're just milled to death. The Shredder appears in all versions of the deck so far, while Goldcollar's Bell and the Pyxis appear less regularly, and as a result, CODEX Shredder is the only one of the trio to make the list. Since 2015, it has been a fixture in Modern, and CODEX Shredder has put up all of its points in Lantern Control decks there. If things continue the way they are for Lantern Control, it is possible that all three of the key mill cards in this deck could make this list in the near future. At number 9, we have GRINDSTONE, which, like CODEX Shredder, was a card tucked away in shoeboxes until a strategy that could abuse the card emerged. Despite being originally printed in 1997, GRINDSTONE did not put up its first points until 2009, after the printing of Painter's Servant. If you get the Servant in play and use GRINDSTONE, it mills the opponent's entire deck in one activation. The two combine to form a Legacy combo deck that could win the game in a hurry. This deck was top tier in Legacy from 2009 to 2014, during which time it put up all of its points. Some vintage versions of the deck have been played over the years, but have never put up a top 8. With no points since 2014, GRINDSTONE may not be moving up this list anytime soon. At number 8, we have a land that mills in NEPHALIA DROWNYARD. Non-basic lands with useful activated abilities are always nice because the cost of playing the card is so low. You're going to need lands, and having one that can perform another function in the late game is always nice. The Drownyard saw all of its play in standard control decks, where it could serve as the backup win condition. Decks to feature it included Esper, Bant, and Blue-Black Control. It has never seen play since rotating out of standard, but I always feel like non-basic lands like this have a shot at appearing in other formats. At number 7, we have a mill card with Storm in Brain Freeze. Famously considered one of Magic's most overpowered mechanics ever, with Mark Rosewater even calling his rankings for mechanics the Storm scale in reference to this, for Morrow, the Storm is the kind of mechanic that they will never use again because it's so busted. Despite all that power, Brain Freeze never saw play in block or standard, but it was far too easy to abuse in other formats. When combined with cards like High Tide or Cloud of Fairies, one could pretty easily get the storm count high enough on Brain Freeze to mill the opponent's entire library in a single turn. This type of deck was featured in the now defunct Extended format, as well as in Legacy and Vintage. At number 6, we have the first version of the Planeswalker that so rudely crashed the video when I tried to show it to you on Monday, and that's ASHIOK, Nightmare Weaver. At only 3 mana, ASHIOK packs some serious punch for a Planeswalker. The +2 ability can slowly mill your opponent out if that's what you need to do, but what makes ASHIOK really scary is that they can start casting creature cards that are exiled with the +2 ability, and then beat the opponents with their own cards. 21 of ASHIOK's 22 points came in the standard format, where it was played as a win condition in decks like Esper Control, Sultai Whip, and Esper Dragons. ASHIOK's most recent top 8 came in Modern in 2018, where it appeared in Sam Black's take on Lantern Control at Grand Prix Santa Clara. ASHIOK does seem like a nice fit for at least the sideboard of Lantern Control decks going forward, so it will be interesting to see if they continue to appear in that role. At number 5, we have Sword of Body and Mind, an equipment that mills the top 10 cards of your opponent's library every time the equipped creature does combat damage to a player. Like all the swords in this cycle, it offers a bunch of other stuff as well. In this case, the usual +2/+2 boost, protection from green and blue, and a 2/2 wolf token to go with the milling every time the creature hits the opponent. In a lot of cases, that milling doesn't end up mattering all that much, because if you're hitting your opponent enough to mill their whole library, well, they've probably taken enough damage to be dead too. But it does provide a win condition against an opponent who has managed to gain a ton of life or something. Like a lot of equipment, it mostly has seen play in formats where it could be played alongside Stoneforge Mystic. This means it saw play in Standard in 2010 and 2011 until Stoneforge Mystic got banned there in June of 2011, after Pro Tour Paris, where the sword, alongside the Mystic, put up 7 top 8s in the dreaded Cobblade deck. It also has 1 Grand Prix top 8 in Extended in a White Weenie deck before it got the ban hammer there too. When Modern was created, Stoneforge Mystic was banned, and it remains banned there to this day. So by 2012, the only formats where Mystic was legal were Legacy and Vintage, and Sword of Body and Mind added 2 Grand Prix top 8s in Legacy that year. It hasn't added to its score since then, however. There does seem to be a lot of people who want Stoneforge Mystic unbanned in Modern though, and if that happens, this sword and many other equipment might start to see more play there. At number 4, we have Broken Ambitions, a counterspell that can mill opponents. While I personally am not a huge fan of the clash mechanic, and I don't think there are a lot of people who are, that's the part of the card that lets it mill. If you win the clash, your opponent has the top 4 cards of their library put into the graveyard. Now, most of the value of Broken Ambitions simply comes from countering the opponent's spell, but the fact that you can go after your opponent's library a little bit is some additional upside. The primary deck it saw play in while in both Block and Standard was a Fairy deck. That usually sought to win the game with damage, not by milling out your opponent. It hasn't seen any play since it rotated out of Standard, and it probably won't. At number 3, we have our second Planeswalker to make the list in JACE Memory Adept. JACE has 2 abilities that let him mill. His +1 lets you draw a card and mill your opponent's top card, while he has a 0 loyalty ability that mills a whopping 10 cards from the top of your opponent's library. This generally means that if JACE stays in play, he can mill your opponent out in 4 or 5 turns, so he represents a very real threat to your opponent's library. JACE was printed in Magic 2012, Magic 2013, and Magic 2014, giving him several years of Standard legality, and he saw some play in each of those Standard formats. At first, he saw play in decks like Blue-White Delver and Esper Control, and near the end of his time in Standard, it was Devotion to Blue and Blue-White Control. JACE is unlikely to see play again outside of Standard, but he did enough while he was there that it seems likely he sticks around on this list for a while. At number 2, we have an Eldrazi that mills in Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger. So, even without the milling part of the card, Ulamog represents a very real threat, since he exiles 2 permanents when cast and has a massive body and indestructibility. Ulamog just being cast is often enough to get opponents to scoop. The fact that Ulamog mills 20 cards in attack is massive though, because without it, Ulamog could be chump blocked forever. He doesn't have an evasive ability, but with that ability, there's no way your opponent is surviving more than 3 turns. Obviously, Ulamog asks you for a ton of mana, so the decks that have made use of this Eldrazi monster generally have a way of cheating it into play or ramping into it. In Standard, it was first part of a ramp deck that made a mod a showing, but then Aetherworks Marvel was printed, giving everyone the ability to power out Ulamog much earlier than normal, and decks running the Marvel are where it saw the vast majority of its play in Standard, and eventually Aetherworks Marvel had to be banned. It has seen a lot of play in Modern too, where in 2016 it was part of some versions of the utterly broken Eldrazi aggro deck that required a banning to be dismantled. Since that banning though, it has found what seems to be a permanent home in Tron decks that can produce tons of mana in a hurry and power out Ulamog as early as turn 4. And at number 1, we have another JACE, this time the original one printed way back in Lorwyn, and that's JACE Beleren. This JACE doesn't mill right away like Memory Adept JACE, but it can tick its loyalty up to draw you and your opponent a card, and once it gets to 10 loyalty, can mill 20 cards. This JACE can work as a source of pure card advantage, using his -1 ability, but the fact that he can function as a win condition when he needs to doesn't hurt. He also has benefited from numerous reprintings. After Lorwyn, he was also printed in Magic 2010 and Magic 2011. As a result, this JACE also had lots of time in Standard. Through his time in Standard, Fairy decks, Blue-Black Control, and Cawblade were his most frequent homes. Standard isn't the only format where JACE was played, though. He put up a few Grand Prix top 8s in Fairy decks in Lorwyn Block Constructed, Extended, and Modern as well. Apart from a stray Grand Prix top 8 in Modern in 2017, JACE hasn't put up any points since 2012, and it may not be long before Ulamog passes him on this list. Well, that does it for this week's MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to see some of the other 160 plus MTG Top 10s I've done over the last few years, check out the playlist that should be on the screen now. Thanks for watching.